for the event is a pretty much bone stock 2010 WR 250R, 1347 gearing, a little bit different than stock. Obviously getting pretty hot going through the woods like that, against a 2018 WR 250F that has a competition kit ECU on it, but other than that is bone stock. Both suspensions are set up bone stock, same rider all four rides, so it should be a pretty fair comparison. I'm exhausted.
Now I'm doing something here that I don't normally do. I'm creating a video on the same day that I recorded it. I wanted to do this for a long time, and there's some pending changes with one of the bikes, so it was a perfect opportunity to test these things out back to back. I know it's a question that I often have, is how fast is a real race bike versus a dual sport bike? So here we go. There's a couple of additional caveats that I need to throw in because the bikes aren't perfectly on level ground. The WRR Dual Sport is in fact rocking a Dunlop D606 in the rear, but it is running a Motaz Tractinator GPS 50/50 tire in the front. I felt that it did affect a little bit on the advanced track, which will be the second track that we do here, but on the more flowy intermediate track here, I don't think it had a huge effect. Maybe could have pushed a little bit more, but that wasn't the limiting factor. So overall, I think this test is pretty fair. I did ride the WRR first. We will circle back to why that's important. But fatigue did play a little bit of a part on my WRF runs. So overall, I think it's about as balanced you can get given the same rider on the same day, back to back, with no best of. These are first attempts, but neither one had major errors. So honestly, the science is pretty good, and if you're asking for more than that, find somebody else that owns both bikes, has a place to ride, can do them both on the same day, and has enough time on both that it's a fairly legitimate test, and then get it for free on YouTube. So stop your belly aching, and this is a fair test. As for me, the rider, I am the constant in this. I am approximately 230 pounds, 5'7", 5'8", in my mid-40s. I've been racing for a fair amount of time. Never been top of the class, but I'm probably fairly in B class. So I could probably throw these around better than a beginner, not quite as good as advanced. So I think honestly it's a pretty good indicator of what most people could get to in the end. Now, it doesn't take long watching the video to realize that there is a speed difference between the two. There is no doubt about that. But in all honesty, there's quite a bit less than you might think. I can run the percentages at the end. I do post up the times at the end of each lap, and I encourage you to stick around for both because the tracks are quite a bit different as far as difficulty level and the type of terrain that they're in, although they are at the same area, but they're two very distinctly different tracks, one with a lot more log hops and this one that's a little bit flowier but also has a lot more roots on it. Now, the track that we started on here is classified as the intermediate track. The one we'll go to at about the 5-minute mark is considered the advanced track, although it's honestly it's not that advanced. It's just more advanced. Not a whole lot of rocky stuff in the area, although both of these tracks have difficulty. The part that I struggle with the most is these open sections, honestly. The rutting with the grass hanging up on the side, it's hard to see where you're going, and if you don't stay dead in that rut, there's some pretty good longitudinal ruts you can get sucked into, so it's not as easy to just crack the throttle and go as you might think. Now, to compare the bikes statistically, they're kind of in different categories. The WR250F, it's roughly 250 pounds, about 38-39 horsepower at the wheel. It has roughly 12 inches of suspension front and rear, which is super long, and it's factory KYB SSS suspension, which is arguably some of the best you can get straight from the factory. I don't have it springed out for me. Obviously at 230 I outweigh it a little bit, but thankfully the bike's a little bit firm from factory, so it honestly holds me up pretty good in anything other than high-speed sand, and if I really start hitting a lot of really jagged rocks and stuff, which you won't find here. The WR250R is about 295 pounds, give or take, and about 24-ish horsepower at the wheel. It also has KYB suspension, front and rear. So honestly, it's pretty good for kind of I wouldn't call it a budget dual sport because it's kind of the elite end of the budget. But it's only got about 10.8 inches of travel. The forks are, I believe, are a little bit thinner. But honestly, the biggest difference you'll notice on this one is not the front end, it's not the total travel, it's not even the damping to a certain degree. It's the rear shock. Now, anybody that's here from my WR 250R side of the channel with more of my adventure dual sporting has likely heard that the WR 250R shock is going to kill you instantaneously. I mean, that's just dumb. Look at how fast we can go on here. I am not an A-class rider. I'm reasonably strong on the bike, but clearly it's not going to kill you because I'm virtually keeping up with a race bike, and one that I'm pretty comfortable on. That being said, you need to plan ahead. Now, I'm going to borrow a little bit from my earlier experience. I started riding off-road on a KLR 600, which I don't know how much it weighs. It's probably 350, 360 pounds. It had spaghetti suspension. That thing was terrifying off-road. Then I moved up into an F800 GS BMW, and I rode that thing off-road and on the track. The name of the game when you have more weight, regardless of what your suspension is that you need to be a little bit firmer on the bike. You need to be standing up, and you can't just ram into things like you do on a race bike. Your position on the bike is far more critical. You need to make sure that your weight's coming off of that front end, and you need to make sure that when you are going over big bumps, whether it be whoops or logs, that you shift your weight back. Make sure that that front end is light, and try to keep the rear end touching the ground at all times. You don't want it to leave the grounds because that's when the rebound gets out of control. It can be done, and quite honestly, some of the advantages of having, I wouldn't say advantage of having the rebound that fast, but you'll notice if you can compare little sections throughout this video that the WR 250R is actually remarkably quick in the tight. The engine advantage that the race bike has is somewhat mooted, and the shorter wheelbase of the WRR allows it to pivot a little bit tighter. Obviously, when we hit open terrain or when we start to blow through big things or get highly technical, there's no comparison. Seriously, like from some of my videos, I can get this WRR to some pretty wild places, but the WRF just takes so much less effort, and I end up eating it so much less. Now, admittedly, I have a lot more seat time on my WR 250R than I do on my 250F. I'm still learning kind of the ins and outs of that bike, and realistically, that I could go a lot faster given enough time on my F. But all that being said, is my son James was cruising behind me. He was swapping bikes out with me to kind of give me a little bit of comparison and make sure that somebody was there in case I knocked myself out. But his comment is that my WRR was all over the place, and that's true, but it can absolutely handle it. You got to learn to trust the bike. That's the other takeaway from heavier dual sport bikes compared to a race bike. You have to lean into it. You have to accept you're going to get pushed around, and good body position covers a lot of that. It was definitely more out of control on the WRR, no question. The WRF felt like it was just getting into its prime. The WRR, I'm pretty sure, could not go much faster than this unless the rider was substantially better, whereas the WRF, honestly, it's at the entry level. I'm riding it like somebody that's relatively new to it. Not brand new to it, but a little bit new to it. Now, the detractors among you are probably saying to yourselves that I'm giving every excuse as to why this was closer than really you think it should be. That being said, it's as fair as a comparison as you can get. I felt I put good laps out there. Like I said, a better rider on the WRF would absolutely eat my times on the 250R, but I'd like to consider myself at the level of rider that most people could reasonably achieve. I am nothing as far as being a specimen physically. Probably a little more cautious than most on the surface, although I don't mind taking a few risks here and there. But going back to the kind of the original question that we were trying to answer is if you're not going to be riding every day and you're not going to be training, a dual sport can get you virtually anywhere that a race bike can. It'll be a little bit slower, there'll be a fewer wheelies, and you're going to tire yourself out, which is where we're coming back to from the beginning. Doing the WRR first was strategic. I knew I was going to get more tired doing it, and I knew that being tired was going to be less of an effect on the WR 250F because it takes less energy to manage. My son James, he is about 80 pounds lighter than me, but skill-wise, he is every bit my equal. Now, when he was riding the 250R, he struggled more than I did. Part of that's probably that I have more seat time than him, but the other part is that I'm a fair bit bigger than he is, and the weight of a dual sport does not affect me as much as it does to him. I'm 90 pounds heavier than he is, and I'd like to think that at least a few of those pounds are muscle. And you do have to fight with the dual sport a little bit more. And that brings me to my final point, which, because it's me, is going to be a corny joke. But this reminds me a whole lot of the old Tim Hortons "And Then I Ate the Bull" commercial, because I rode this bike to and from the track, and last weekend I took it to and from the mountains, and you can't do that on a race bike.